Everybody, welcome to another episode of Producing Out Loud. We've got some very special guests. We're here in Studio A, which is a different change of pace for this series, but we've got four of us here, so we thought we'd move to a big room. So welcome to Studio A here at Pyramind. I'm joined today, and I'm going to let Greg do the introductions, but I want to introduce Greg, since you may or may not know him, our CEO and creative director of Pyramind and founder. Greg
Indeed.
Gordon.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Yeah.
This is fun to be here, and really great to have these two special guests joining us today. We just came out of Jeff's and my class, Music Business 210, Planning for Success, talking about music licensing today and creating music licensing libraries. And I'm joined here today with Wendell Yuponce, right? And I'm also joined with Andy Collins here, Strategic Partnerships with FirstCom Music. Wendell, I've known you quite a while now. We were just talking about how many years we go back in the studio business. And you've certainly come a long way as a freelance composer in this industry. And you've been able to have a lot of success, not only as a composer, commercial composer, but also building licensing music catalogs and developing a really deep strategic relationship with FirstCom Music, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we can just get started here by talking about how you got your start in music licensing and what was the genesis of the relationship that you have with Andy here.
Well, the original relationship with FirstCom goes back to 1987. And at the time, I was actually what you would call a ghostwriter for another music library, which was supplying music to the soaps on network television. And they were approached, the owners of the library were approached by FirstCom to kind of create some additional music for, I believe, a news and broadcast / industrial reel. And neither of the writers that own the library wanted to do it, so they sent me down. They said, you have a week, write a couple of news themes. So I listened to a lot of John Williams, and I showed up, and there was a huge string section and then kind of an abbreviated brass section, and we were off and running. And I met Ken Nelson, who is now, what is Ken's partner?
Executive producer.
Executive producer. At the time, Ken Nelson was a junior producer, and he became my my interface with ongoing FirstCom projects. And from there, on these news reels, he gave me a number of other projects, which I did for myself, and a lot of them ended up as first choice libraries for NFL films. So we went from there, and then we kind of expanded out. We would do orchestral music and then certain kinds of pop music. But I've had that relationship since 1987. So at the time in the 90s, while I was also doing television, and I'd been in and out of television and commercial work, I never refused any of these library gigs, which was great because when the bottom fell out of the television market, I was already still generating a good portion of royalties at that point. And the most interesting thing about FirstCom specifically, though, is that they have an incredible amount of reach, having been around since, I want to say, the late 70s. Is that true?
Early in the 80s, 35 years now.
35 years. So they have an incredible reach in terms of music supervisors and stuff. The stuff gets placed. Some of the most recent placements I've had, specifically with House of Mystery off the FC animated title, there was an entire Sherlock Holmes spoof segment with on Saturday Night Live, and that was all pulled from that library. So of course that's going to represent a nice chunk. And these are the kinds of relationships that FirstCom versus a more independent kind of music library has. So
that makes a big difference in terms of the reach and where, actually getting that music placed so that you can really see long-term success with the music that you're producing, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, and this is the kind of thing that, like, there may be a lot of very attractive looking younger libraries, as you had mentioned, and they might even have a good number of very good high quality tracks, but what they don't have is the relationships with the studios and the production houses and the music supervisors. And FirstCom is very good at being known as one of the go-to libraries, and that's one of the extraordinary things about it. Doesn't mean that...
Talk a little bit, sorry to cut you off, but okay. I think you were talking earlier in the class about, your approach to composing for music libraries and how different that is from being an artist who's writing songs and trying to place a song, so that you can actually really create depth in the quantity of music library that you create. Because I think that is a key point for a lot of people to understand, that this isn't just about writing songs. This is about writing cues that are really relevant to the industry, because you're not necessarily writing about what you love or writing the music you really want to write, but you're writing about what the industry wants and what you think is going to get placed, right?
Well, first of all, the difference between library, and I started within library music first with the soap opera stuff, and then later on doing it more extensively with FirstCom, is that if you imagine a song, you would probably have an intro and then some kind of like thing in the middle. Let's just call it the middle thing, and it'll build to the end. And inevitably, all that you learn as a musician up to that point is it's this kind of thing that peaks up and it has a high point. There may be a preamble afterwards where it kind of fades out, but essentially it becomes all about this dynamic build to a place of emotional response. Now, the thing about writing for music library is that, like, if you were to take the beginning section, that in itself is only one area of development. And then that might be just a piece of music by itself. It will only be a beginning, and there will literally be nothing else. It won't go anywhere. It's just literally some fanfare, and that's it. And then you'll have this middle piece, and all that middle piece is doing is, again, that's another cue or another piece of music. And now all that's doing is sustaining a specific mood, whether it's like intrigue or suspense or just like some kind of sense of worry as time passes. And the bulk of all music library is actually in these mood moments that are sustained anywhere from a minute to 3 minutes. Now that's completely counterintuitive to what you learn after you go through music school, where you must go somewhere. You're obligated to kind of find a place to be, and then another place which kind of gives you some sense of resolution. In fact, if you have too many resolutions, if you were to extrapolate that out to like scoring a short film or a film or a television show, what would happen is if you keep having these mini moments where you kind of have an intro, then something that builds, and then it resolves every time, you actually take something that might be a 30-minute episodic television show or documentary, and now you're starting to chapterize it. So instead of you getting a sense that there's an overall arc that built over 30 minutes, you've actually reduced that down to, like, say, 4 chapters, which all are just kind of peaking, and then you're starting over again. And that's not the intent of the filmmaker. So a lot of typical songwriting skills are counterintuitive to writing library music. The thing I always say is, don't be interesting, be compelling, right? So interesting would be to kind of like tell an entire story within that minute piece of music. And compelling would be, well, how long can you keep that moment of suspense going? Now, there's some practical aspects, and the one that I pointed out to your class was actually avoiding actual cadential resolutions. Now, for those of you who are non-musical people, you want to look that up. What essentially means is like, you know, dun 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 dun. Now that's the cadence. That's the ending. A music library cue would be dun 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 dun, and then it would never resolve itself. Now, what happens is when these pieces of music that are occurring within your video, or it could be a video game even, or documentary, whatever, because they don't resolve, each of them leaves an open-ended moment where the chapter continues as the music leaves. Now, with these open-ended non-cadential endings, you'll find that like you're able to kind of build towards a peak and a resolution towards the end. Now, what music library does is they never give you that ending. They just give you the body of everything that's sitting in the middle.
So it's really up to the editor to kind of chapterize, right? So he can select, okay, this is where we're really going to come to that final piece. You're not, as a composer, that's not your job.
Yeah.
Right? Your job is to give them the paint to sort of brush stroke that entire scene out as long as they need to go and just keep it going.
Exactly.
It's a very different approach.
It is, and in fact, for years the rule was that like you got to go 3 minutes.
Right.
Now you've created quite a handful of these libraries. Now, how many have you built with FirstCom?
I couldn't even tell you, but it's got to be numbering in the over over 1,000 some tracks.
But these 1,000 some tracks are then grouped in specific genre-based libraries.
Yes.
So, Andy, tell us a little bit about how you work with a composer like Wendell to kind of define these libraries, and what is it you look for in them?
Well, now, to start out with, I'm really on the other side of the building, you might say, from Wendell.
Okay, great.
I'm on the business development side. Everything that is done as far as with the composers themselves, like Wendell, is handled through Ken Nelson, our executive producer. I'm on the side of the building that goes out and finds, in my particular case, what's new. What are new uses for music? You have the traditional radio and TV and production houses and film and TV, and you have those traditional markets. But today, there's a lot of change going on in the production library area. So my job is to go out and find places that weren't being, that nobody was going after, and finding them, and then coming back actually to Ken and saying, Ken, here's an area that we either have music or maybe we need to beef up music. I mentioned in the class briefly, there were some changes because of some legal issues on music to bring the cheer industry, which we never would have thought of, which is this cheerleading competition. And because of some legal changes and the way that their contests are worked, now they need legal music. So that's opened up a whole new area for us and new business potential. And we have to make sure we have the music to fit those needs. And so we go to Ken, and Ken goes to people like Wendell or people that would be specialized in different types of music so that we can provide the music that the clients need in the long run.
And to be clear, they were basically taking pop music and not licensing it. They were taking tracks, cutting them together as mixes, unlicensed, so that they were not cleared for use, and then ending up on ESPN or things like that. Is that what's going on?
It wasn't as much as on ESPN. There were companies, we'll refer to them as mixed companies, and some of those companies were taking pop music, what I would refer to as commercial music, taking bits and pieces, putting them together, and selling them to the cheer organizations, the cheer teams, for use in their competitions. Well, one of the record companies, not Universal, but another record company, decided they had had enough. They went after these mixed companies, and as a result, the organization that runs the cheer competition said, hey, they had no harm on them, but they decided to make sure to keep everybody out of trouble, that they were going to make sure everyone was licensing the music properly. And they started doing that, and that brought an opportunity because suddenly a lot of the music they were using was this commercial music.
Right.
They can't use that anymore. So they need people to go in and write and produce music that's legal to be used in that industry. And that's the type of opportunity that I look for and that FirstCom looks for.
So you're here for GDC. Talk a little bit about trends you're seeing in the interactive media space, and specifically with VR. We're really kind of focusing here quite a bit on the VR space and where that's all headed. Are you guys doing anything specifically for 360 mixes and things like that?
Yeah.
And on the business development side, what does that look like for you as a new?
At the National Association of Broadcasters convention last year, I went to talk to some people in VR, and I said, what can we do for you? What are your needs that are going to be different from anything else that we've been doing? And they said, we need 360 music. We need music that, and this was very early on. We need music that can turn as you turn your head. And I said, I don't know how we do that. So I go back to Ken, and I said, Ken, what can we do to help this industry? What do we have? And he said stems,
Yes.
which are basically the different instruments are recorded separately, and we have them available separately so that you could have the trumpets coming from here and the long strings coming from here, and you could take the stem and use it to develop 3D or 360 audio. We have, I don't know of anybody that has more stems than we do. We have between 9,000 and 10,000 tracks in stems format. So I have been working with a lot of the software companies that are doing the spatial audio and the 3D audio to work with them, because a lot of them were saying, we weren't going to do anything with music. We were just going to do audio. And it's like, okay, you need music. And so now we're working with them in a lot of the things that they're doing to come up with it, because that's going to be a growth area.
I figured.
I'm at the forefront of technology, and I'm an old guy, but I've been on the forefront of technology for a long time. When 3D TV came out, I said it just doesn't do anything for me. Didn't get one. And people were amazed. I had HD TV before there was any HD TV programming. When I first put on VR goggles, I said, this is really interesting. When I put on VR goggles and 3D audio headphones, I said, this is something that is going to make a tremendous difference.
We are right there with you.
Yeah, we absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Whether it's ambisonic or binaural mixing, spatialized audio. We're sitting in a room here that's an 11.2 surround theater.
Wow, okay.
That we're actually going to be adding more speakers to the ceiling on to create a full spatialized mixing environment in here. So we believe in this as well.
So
definitely.
Atmos certified or?
Huh?
Atmos certified?
We're working on that, yes.
That's one of those areas that we can see in the future. And like I say, we have a lot of
5-10 years ago,
stems.
this was not even an area, let alone something that was going to be this exciting from a business development standpoint. It just really kind of shot out of nowhere.
That's right. And you know, our music is great, but the first thing we have to do is work with the software companies so they can figure out how to integrate our music, work with the people like FMOD and Waves to integrate our music into their platforms so that people have access to the music, they have a system that works where they can do it, and that's where we are now. It's a long, slow process. What I do doesn't happen fast, but I think it's a really exciting area.
Very strategic, definitely.
I mean, the notion of you guys getting on the editor's hard drive at all the major studios so that they can just drag and drop right into the scene. They don't have to call you. They have your music, right? Getting to that point with VR so that you're embedded in, let's say, an FMOD system, right? As a drag and drop library, that's a huge opportunity for you guys. I would think, right? That's where, those are those kind of deals that you're always on the hunt for, right?
That's right.
And then talk about, from your side as a composer, what have you seen? You said a lot about orchestral music. I'm curious if you've seen trends in the last 5-10 years with electronic music being such a big thing in the pop culture and dance music and whatnot, obviously making its way into TV and film. Does that affect you and your style as a composer? Are these techniques and tools that you've incorporated, or is it something you just stick to your lane?
Oh, no, man, I do all kinds of stuff. Right now I'm doing actually, it's really kind of thing. I don't even know, because I'm under an NDA, but let's just say it's a fruit company, you know? And they developed, their normal, I don't know if you call them white papers or specifically with the App Store, the rules on how to get stuff into App Store, oops, you know? So they have a whole list of things that you have to honor before you can put your materials in their store. And this year they did it as a digital comic. And the digital comic came with a score for each one. So some of those, so there were 6 of these. And one of them definitely sounds like it looks like an 8-bit Nintendo thing. So there's an 8-bit sounding score on that one. One of them kind of was like intrigue, so it kind of sounds like a Peter Gunn score, and you know, so it's just whatever it is. But I will say this about electronic music: the thing about electronic music is it lends itself more easily to surround environments, and orchestral music is more appropriate, say in more traditional kinds of settings. I don't know how it's going to shake out from a surround point of view, because I was actually involved in the first consumer surround, the AC3 project, Yamaha, back in, I want to say, 95. So they created a demo that was to be played in the surround rooms in all of the electronic stores at the time. And all of that interstitial music that wasn't concerts or anything specifically was my music, and it was all developed in surround. The interesting thing about it was moving forward into 2000, because that would be the late 90s, into 2000, all of these DVDs came out. They came out with surround sound, and I was, again, one of the first guys that had a surround sound set up in my own little home studio. And I had set up by one of the guys that was a buddy of mine that worked over at Skywalker West in Los Angeles. So he helped me set it up. The thing was that, like, when it first came out, they were trying to figure out all these ways to handle music. And inevitably, what came about was they felt that, like, audience perspective was still the most comfortable way to do it. Right. Nobody wanted to be in the band. Right. So your typical concert was still ended up being front perspective, reflective fill in the back, and the audience and ambient around the side. Exactly.
Right.
So in these more traditional formats of music, I don't think that they'll necessarily lend themselves to a full surround. My suggestion has been, and I've been kind of, at times when I've been working with Andy, has been to actually create more of an orchestral bed with only 3 elements that are movable. Then the integrity of the orchestral experience is still maintained to some degree. So that's my concept. I mean, but it's not even proof in concept because we don't know how that's going to go. But my guess is that, like, moving orchestral music will be quite dissettling to people in the end.
We've actually one of the 3D audio companies I'm talking to, working with, they came up with EDM. They said you do not have as much of a preconceived notion idea where the music's coming from, so we can get away with moving it around more without it becoming confusing to the person. Whereas, if you have violins spinning over your head, you're going to get a headache pretty soon.
With dubstep wobbles, they can go wherever they want to go, right?
That's right.
Crazy sounds in the first place.
That's right.
Speaking of violins and kind of orchestral, I'm curious, obviously you've gotten to work a lot with orchestras. How much sort of sample library work do you do versus orchestral, like true orchestral recording? And for the young producers out there, like, any tips on getting going when you don't get in front of the London Philharmonic to do a recording? Like, obviously you've had a ton of experience on both.
Well, when the samples in the late 80s moving into the mid 90s were just not of the level of true orchestral music. Right. So when productions came down the line and they wanted orchestra, I mean, they hired those bodies. The current libraries as they stand, and you can look them up. I'm sure you have a list of recommendeds for your students that you think they should investigate, are all of the level that you can kind of get very close. But you have to write that. I always considered writing for samples as writing for a room full of idiots. If you take
those are my clients you're talking about. Be careful.
No, I'm talking about the samples themselves as musicians. When you take 20 violinists and you have them all play the same note, you can sustain that note for a good minute and it will still be dynamic and interesting, and something is happening there. It's the human experience,
the bow movement,
the varying aspects of the phasing and non-recurrence. If you hold a violin sample for a minute, I don't know how you won't get fired from whatever gig you were supposed to be writing for, okay? It just doesn't have the dynamic quality of development over that period of time. So when I say writing...
stuff, is that what you're saying? Like, keep it short and sweet.
Well, actually the way you know that a sample library is good is 2 things. The quality of the sustain and the quality of the release. And everybody always gets fooled when they're young about, like, how it sounds when you hit it at the beginning. Wow, it sounds like real from the front end. And it's like all of the quality of the higher end libraries is in actually the sustain and the release. If you can actually sit there and play these 2 notes and they feel like they're kind of moving and growing for an N amount of time, like say 10 seconds, that's a high quality sample. And if you can pull your finger away and it kind of naturally just decays, like the way a violinist who releases his bow, you can actually picture it. They pull it away, and you can actually feel the resonance of the instrument even after the bow has left the contact of string. That kind of thing, that's how you tell. And because I was taught that very early in my career by my mentors, I've always chosen, in some instances, counterintuitive libraries to what everybody else is using. But my simulations, for the amount of money I always put in, always sounded of higher quality.
Right.
So the thing about libraries now is that at this point, I would say I have not been in front of a live orchestra since 2005.
Okay.
Having said that, a lot of my stuff sounds of that quality. And I think it's two things. One is the high quality of the sample libraries, and two, understanding the nature of how orchestral music is done. And I know this is a long way around, so bear with me. So for instance, when you do a legato, kind of very slow rubato kind of emotional cue, well, what you hear when you go out to the symphony is you hear the overall violin section, and then you hear the concertmaster just a little bit louder than everybody else. Mm-hmm. So when I do that kind of a cue, I will actually layer a string section and then one solo violin slightly above that. So it sounds like a concertmaster is leading them the whole way. Now, you don't know that unless you go out and you listen to a lot of orchestra. So I had the rare opportunity when I was first in Seattle, Los Angeles, that I had a buddy who was a technical engineer for the MGM scoring stage. So even though I had not at that point that much exposure to orchestral music, he would call me down whenever John Williams was in there. And I've actually watched him score a number of Indiana Jones films, and I watched them score the Summer Olympics theme.
For the win. Let's talk more about Indiana Jones. No, I'm just
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah.
One of the best films ever, though, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's really cool that you were there.
But when you're there, you get this sense of what it sounds like to hear 30 violins at pianissimo, just barely playing, and it's not like a sound that's really coming at your ear. It's kind of actually floating over you. So if you don't attend symphony concerts, you're never going to understand that that's what you're going for. And so your mixes will always sound a little bit too direct, a little bit more like a pop record than they will an actual orchestral moment. And mine, it's like the final test for me is I close my eyes and I say to myself, can I imagine this occurring in the scoring stage? Am I hearing at least some of the subconscious indicators that tell me I'm hearing a live performance? And that's a combination of a lot of the technical things you teach in terms of distancing and reverb and reflections and all of that. But those lessons do you absolutely no good if you haven't had the experience. So, I mean, the biggest thing about good orchestral simulations is understanding what an orchestra sounds like in an acoustic space.
That's great. You know, one of the last things, I don't know how we're doing on time, but okay, good. You mentioned your mentor, right? And we just launched our Pyramind mentorship network here, and it's a big push for us for 2017. And I think all of us that have kind of made our way in the industry, all have had at least one, if not several, mentors throughout our career. So, you know, maybe a little bit of thoughts around personally what that's meant for you as well as for you, Andy. You know, where would you be without your mentor, kind of a thing.
And if you were, just to dovetail off of that, if you were to be speaking to a student who's coming into this industry now, wanting to get into music licensing and building a catalog, say for FirstCom, how would you mentor them? What would you say to them in terms of what they would want to do to begin their journey into this world?
Yeah.
Well, you know, obviously, my experience is not on the music side itself. My experience is on the licensing side.
But this is great because we've got both the business strategic development side and the creative side here, right?
On the business side, you know, it's like so many things, you know, that you can't teach somebody hard work, and you have to be creative. You know, a lot of people work hard, but you have to be creative, and you just have to find somebody. I look back at people, you know, one person I think of as my first sales manager when I was a kid, you know, at a radio station. And I think of when I was in this industry 30 years ago for Media General, you know, Dick Denham and Carl Reynolds. The funny thing is the general manager of FirstCom was at Media General, slightly different time, and has some of the same mentors that I did.
Right.
So, you know, that is such an important part because it's good to be able to look back, and you'll have different mentors for different things. Mm-hmm. You know, even though they're all different, you'll have one person that, you know, this person was great at closing a sale. This person was great at forging relationships. this is someone in my personal life that I want to mentor. And to me, that is just the most important thing, that there's a lot of people that have the technical knowledge to do whatever it is, whether it's business side or the music side, but there is that other factor that goes in that's just unbelievably important.
Yeah, it's the whole picture, right? It's
Right.
You're not just a sales guy, you're a human being. And it's this holistic picture of everything that you're going to touch through your career, as well as keeping like your kind of soul centered to a certain degree. I mean,
That's right.
you know, we both teach music business to some of these kids, and part of the thing is getting your mindset right in the morning to tackle a day and be productive. And it's glaringly apparent how many of them don't do that. Right? So everything we can do to kind of help them succeed, it's like any other form of coaching, right? It's not a pinpoint thing. We're covering a lot of ground. But I really like what you said about different kinds of mentors for different things, right? Because you'd be remiss to only have one throughout your whole life or your whole career.
Yeah, and it's really, I think back on different people that have taught me different things, and you learn life's lessons from various people that you build up a trust for, so that you want to be influenced by them, and that's something you choose.
Yeah.
Well, I was the guy who had one mentor, and
Strike everything I just said.
yeah. Well, no, look, I mean, it was really interesting because I was originally hired with two other people to ghost for the soaps, and it was one of the very well recognized orchestrators in town running this library, and this was side income for him. By the first month, the other two more accomplished composers, and I felt like I was just holding on for dear life, actually quit. They couldn't handle the amount of the demands for edits and redos and rewrites and all of that. So I became the only one, and I was left. But I didn't have much skill, quite honestly, but I was tenacious. And so this orchestrator just took me under his wing, and he just broke it all down. And after he succeeded in breaking my personality, he just slowly trained me back up. And within 6 years, his partner couldn't tell whether it was him writing or me. And that was only one facet. But what was really gratifying to me was years later, I had my own television shows. I was musical director for the Screen Actors Guild Award, and I was having one of those moments where it was like, wow, it was all just coming together. And even at that point, he would call me up every 2 or 3 weeks, and he would say, hey, Wendell, you want to go down to that Mexican place and get some food? And so he would come down and we would have lunch, and they'd listen and go, well, maybe I'll do this instead of that. Here I am, I'm already like got 3 television shows on the air, and I'm kind of important. And he's still at it. But the most beautiful thing was that he had 2 sons, and they were both musical, but they were both kind of contemporary music. And here's this man with just unparalleled orchestral skills. So he would teach me. And it's kind of moving because he passed away, but he used to call me his little project. He would come over and he would teach me, and he would just teach me. And it made the difference for me because I started at a later point than most composers. And I had to learn a lot of skills while just being dragged over the rocks backwards. Right. But I had this one person in my corner. And the thing is that I see with new musicians that I think that they're so anxious to get it going that they eschew the opportunity to be mentored. They literally are too excitable to even be still enough to be told what to do. And that's part of the world. So I'm not like calling out young musicians for their talent or anything. But the other thing is that I do think that it's a lot tougher for us older guys to kind of hold our lives together. And it's not as compartmentalized as it was maybe 3 years ago. So it's hard for us also to kind of set that time aside to mentor these young musicians and teach them the necessary skills. So, I think it's twofold. I think it's a shame because there are bona fide techniques and perspectives and philosophies that us older guys at this point know that we could teach the younger ones. But it almost seems that the world, the way it rotates and the way things change, is almost counterintuitive that. But that's the thing. The business of music can evolve constantly, But the art of music is always going to be somewhat the same.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think the young composers are getting maybe shortchanged. But I mean, luckily you guys are starting that, and I'm sure that now that I'm here and I'm down the street, I'll be mentoring some kids myself. So,
well, I witnessed it in just 30 minutes in the room. You being able to express what was significantly important in how you approach composing for library music versus what so many of them are doing as developing themselves as artists and writing songs, and really understanding the difference between those two approaches was a fundamental light bulb moment for a lot of kids in the room. I saw that go off, and that's, to be able to communicate that as effectively as you did, the concept of ostinatos and the holding patterns and how it doesn't, how the music doesn't necessarily resolve, was a really interesting moment to see the reaction in the room, and people go, oh, especially after you went through and played your cues so people could hear the cue and understand exactly what you were talking about. I thought that was very significant. So,
by the way, we're going to
yeah.
need a gratis license for a piece for this.
oh yeah,
So
Well,
you
of
and I will
course.
talk about that later.
of course.
We'll negotiate that.
Well, I just want to thank you guys. I think we're about out of time. This has been really a nice chat. Thanks again for spending some time both down the street with our class and from your busy GDC schedule to come in and have a little chat here with us in the studio.
Excellent.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very
man.
much.
I really appreciate it.
If you're a music producer, subscribe to our channel and stay up to date on the latest Pyramind tutorial videos, track breakdowns, elite sessions, and more. Visit us at pyramind.com.